After what seems to be a mostly successful North Korea summit, in which the Donald went out and talked about denuclearization with Kim Jong-un, the same writing on the walls has shown up on the walls, as has happened every time Donald Trump makes the news since he got elected, and even at points before that during the campaign trail, and even on other points before that from when he talked about running for president in years such as 2012. I was looking at a comment thread on Facebook yesterday, and one of the users, a friend of a friend, summed it up perfectly. It's a cliche by this point, but it still holds true. Donald Trump could cure cancer, and he would still be accosted for it by the mainstream media. Now, I'm actually not denying this is true. I've seen what the media does, and I've been seeing the writing on the wall ever since Donald Trump fatefully came down that escalator in 2015, the day that he announced that he was going to run for president and officially put his hat in the ring. Ever since then, the media, and Democrats especially on the ground level, have been trying to tear him apart and tear apart his ability to run for president in a way that's been unprecedented to me in anything else that I have ever seen. Now, in spite of the fact that I did not know most of the people that were in the comment thread, I chose to comment back. The people seemed to be like-minded and seemed to be accepting of an idea. And in my comment, I cited the fact that George W. Bush did not receive the same kind of treatment that Donald Trump did, and there was more to Trump's presidency than just the fact that he has an R next to his name. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The reason that I want to bring that up is that a lot of people on the right like to cite the fact that George W. Bush was president while social media was still in its infancy and in some cases barely even existent. So you could pass around the joke on people's email servers, but you really couldn't put your opinion out there for people to see at the time. And in part, this is true. But I do think back to the McCain and Romney campaigns as well. Less on McCain because social media was still essentially in its infancy at the time, but a lot towards Romney because it was in full threat at that point. You almost couldn't function on the internet at the time if you didn't have a Facebook page. It was possible, but in 2012 it was kind of difficult. Now, with Romney, there were a lot of accusations that he wanted to put all women back in the kitchen, accusations that he wanted to put all blacks back in chains, accusations that he tied the dog to the roof of the car and drug it down the highway. I think that last one came from National Lampoon's Vacation, but regardless, it was something that a lot of conservative pundits now like to joke about when they look back at the Romney campaign as well. But the reason that I want to bring this up is because for Romney, it was definitely a different treatment than what Trump is getting now. It was kind of the same treatment, but what Trump is getting is magnified 100 times versus what Romney had. While Romney was running for president, me living in what is still considered to be a mostly blue state in spite of the fact that most of our offices went red last year, you could still have a decent conversation about Mitt Romney and his policies. You weren't shouted down, and people didn't come out and try to protest every time they heard that name. Romney could get to speaking events in very liberal cities and very liberal states at the time. He didn't have to worry about getting protested, and he didn't have to worry about having the building blown up that he was speaking in. During the Romney campaign, he definitely got the regular Republican treatment, including racism, sexism, and homophobia. But he still could go out and make a campaign, and had he been elected president, I do believe that he would have been given the freedom to get things done. However, the Trump campaign and now the Trump presidency are very different than what Romney would have been had he been elected in 2012. And Donald Trump really represents something that's very dangerous, not only to Democrats and the Democrat agenda, but to career politicians in general. That was part of the reason that Romney was able to get by and have people at least be somewhat decent to him outside of the normal Republican terminology that was thrown at him. Mitt Romney himself is a longtime politician that has been playing the game for a long time. Donald Trump is not, and I believe that is a part of the reason that he is excoriated more than any other politician or president in history at the time. I come to this from experience because I did vote for Trump in the general election. And actually, by the time that the primaries came to Wisconsin, I was also voting for him in the primary elections as well. But he was not my first choice coming into the race. Because of my beliefs and the reason that I did vote for him, he was the best choice by the time the primaries came into my state. But he was definitely not the first choice. My first choice was actually Carly Fiorina. Like Trump, Fiorina was a renowned businesswoman who had taken a large company and had managed to competently run it at the time. I will admit part of the reason that I did want to put Fiorina on the ticket was to try and use some of the identity politics that the left likes to use as well. I thought for sure that having a woman run for president was going to expel some of the sexist comments that tend to come around when Republicans try to run for office. But for the most part, my reason for backing Fiorina during the primary season was that she is, like Trump, a political freshman. Fiorina, along with Carson and Trump, at the time of the 2016 primaries, had never held a political office in their lives. They came directly from the private sector and chose to run for the highest office there was. And all three of them did very well going through the primaries. The popularity of these three freshman candidates really shows a change in the attitude of the American people to the idea of a government by the people for the people. Fiorina was very popular when she came into the race. Most articles that talk about it show that she may have faded fast even though she peaked early. And Dr. Carson was one of the last people to drop out of the race. And he had a ton of votes that were coming in for him in the primaries before he did. And of course, our president is a freshman political candidate. And while the thought of a freshman political candidate going straight to the top of the United States government is a very exciting thing for the people that voted for him, it's a very dangerous idea for politicians, especially career politicians, and especially in today's internet age. Now, one of the big arguments that came about while Donald Trump became the nominee for the Republican Party was political experience, because Trump had none. But this was a familiar argument, and I had heard it before. Critics of Barack Obama love to cite the fact that he didn't really have much political experience as well, especially not enough to be president. Barack Obama was only 47 years old when he took the oath of office in 2009. And by the Constitution, that is legal. But a lot of his critics like to say that he was inexperienced, that he was too young, that he was too impulsive to go through and effectively perform the job of the president. It's funny to me that a lot of these same people are now saying that Donald Trump, with his lack of political experience, is going to be the saving grace. I never did cite Barack Obama's political experience. In 2008, I didn't know enough about him, and I actually abstained from voting out of that election because I didn't know enough about either candidate. But one thing that I would never say and did never say is that Obama should have been disqualified for his lack of experience. Case in point, he shouldn't have. Fresh ideas are great for an executive branch, and a government by the people for the people should mean that everybody gets a chance to get up and govern at some point or another and at some level or another. So I do tend to lean towards the opinion that Donald Trump's lack of experience as a president is what makes him the saving grace for this country. And I really do feel like he might be a saving grace no matter how boorish he is. I'll admit that I was reluctant to vote for Trump when he became the presumptive nominee. But I also knew that if I hadn't voted for him, you might as well have counted my vote for Hillary, which is something that I never wanted to see in my lifetime. But I did vote for him anyway because Donald Trump did something that no other candidate for president has done in my lifetime, and something that I don't think any candidate for president has done since at least the early 1800s. Donald Trump made it okay for anybody and everybody to run for office. Any office, anywhere. Now, I come out and say often that Donald Trump represents an idea that we need to have in our government. Donald Trump represents the idea that the government should be for the people. And the counter argument that people come back to me with is the fact that Donald Trump doesn't really represent any of us. He's a rich real estate mogul from New York City. And that's very true, but it's not necessarily Donald Trump himself that I'm looking at. As I mentioned before, it's the idea. It's the fact that Donald Trump made it okay for anybody and everybody to get up and run for office, and nobody should really have any excuse anymore. You can't cite political inexperience when a freshman candidate started out his campaign and essentially on his first try rose to the presidency of the United States. It's because of this that Donald Trump is a very, very dangerous force to the establishment on both sides, and especially to career politicians. The internet makes it very easy for people with good ideas to go out and get their ideas out there. It even makes it easy for people with bad ideas to go out and get their ideas out there. Most of all, it makes it easy to have name recognition for people that want to rise to the top. And anybody can go out and make a GoFundMe page or a Patreon page and take donations and fund his or her campaign that way. While Bernie Sanders had a lot of money that he could play around with during his presidential candidacy, a lot of his candidacy and his campaign were crowdfunded by small donations throughout the country. And if you can do that for a lifelong career senator, then you can definitely do that for your neighbor down the street who has a good idea and who may change the way that the governance runs. And I'm not saying that everybody should get out and run for president. I would love to see that because I would love to see a lot of the debates between career politicians and general everymen. But you can go out and you can run for representative. Those get elected out every 2 years. You can run for Senate. Those get elected out every 6 years. And you don't have to go to the federal level. Your state has representatives. Your municipality probably has a board of director. Your school board probably has seats that could use to be challenged. For years, there are so many of those seats that keep going unchallenged year after year, and an incumbent just goes back and sits in that seat without any sort of fight and without any sort of accountability. The U.S. House of Representatives district that I grew up in actually did go unchallenged this past year. Now, if Trump screws up big time, the media are going to cover it, and even if he doesn't screw up big time, the media are going to try and paint Donald Trump as a demon. Our mainstream media has been shown time and time again that they are working closely with establishment and Democrat politicians in order to keep them in office year after year after year. And if that is the media's intent, then a failed Donald Trump presidency is something that they will use for years and years to come to discourage new freshman senators, representatives, and state representatives and legislators, and governors, and any other office that you can think of from running from scratch. Our Congress will go back to being an insiders club, where in order to get in, you will have to be preened and primped from a very early age in order to get into their club and decide the fates of the millions of people under you that you try to represent. And unfortunately, that is what our Congress has become. Our Congress is filled with people that got out of college with their political science degrees at age 22 and stayed in Congress into their 60s, 70s, and sometimes 80s. I would call that a feudal system of lords and ladies. And if I remember correctly, 242 years ago, we gave our government the finger that had a system like that because it wasn't representing us at all. And we stepped away and we made our own government. And we called it by the people, for the people. And with those people making laws, and if they do indeed have the media in their back pocket, like so many people in America accuse them of, then the election of Donald Trump was the first nail in their coffin, but the successful Trump presidency is one of the most dangerous things to their ways of life and their lives going forward as they go. And the special interests and the other big businesses out there who bribe politicians and buy politicians for one reason or another know that this is a problem as well. If you have to go back and buy a new politician every 2, 4, or 6 years, that's going to get very expensive in a very big hurry. At this point, I think 2018 is too early. We're already barreling down the middle of primary season throughout the states, and I don't think there's going to be a big change coming as far as the Congress goes. I think it's still going to be lined with a lot of career politicians, and a lot of the seats are going to hold. But if Donald Trump is successful in his presidency and gets the majority of his agenda passed, and especially if he gets that wall built, that's going to leave 2020 to be a very, very interesting political year. In addition to the mudslinging campaign that's going to be aimed at keeping Donald Trump from getting reelected in 2020, considering he's already announced his candidacy for that year, we're going to see a lot of career politicians in our Senate and our House of Representatives get primaried in that same year. And that's great because that means there's going to be a lot of news coverage and a lot of people who have not had to be held accountable thus far, some of them throughout their entire lives, are going to have to be held accountable for the first time. My biggest fear in 2016 was the fact that I could either vote for Hillary or I could vote for Donald Trump, who had been a Democrat growing up and had been giving campaign donations to Chuck Schumer as close as 2012. I thought those were my only two options, but I pulled the lever because the Donald did represent the by the people, for the people attitude that our country needs to take back. I have been very pleasantly surprised by the fact that Trump has governed very conservatively and has been able to change things on the local stage and on the world stage and stack the deck for the United States instead of stacking the deck against it, as previous presidents and politicians have. But my beliefs remain the same. The most important part of the Trump presidency, and the most important part going forward, is the by the people, for the people attitude that we need to keep in place. It's time to take our government back at all levels, local, state, and federal, and start making our government work for us instead of the other way around. What do you think about the idea of putting freshman politicians into federal, state, and local offices? Have you ever considered running? And what kind of platform would you want to run on if you were given the chance and it was made okay for you to run? I always welcome thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlogTwitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for taking the time to listen to this show and support this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care, everyone.